Welcome to the Growth Cap Podcast, where we chat with CEOs, investors, and other key industry leaders to uncover insights and strategies for accelerating growth and succeeding in business. I'm your host, RJ Lumba. In this episode, we chat with Bill Martin, who has a long track record as a successful entrepreneur and investor, with a particular focus on financial technology and software businesses. Bill is currently the chairman and chief investment officer of Raging Capital Management, a private investment partnership primarily focused on public equities that he founded in 2006. Raging Capital Management has compounded at 15% net of all fees and expenses since its founding through Q1 2021, and is well regarded for its small cap and activist investments, substantial alpha generation on the short side, and private investments. As an entrepreneur, Bill co-founded several successful financial technology companies, including Raging Bull and InsiderScore. He also co-founded and is a senior advisor to Princeton Equity Group, a provider of growth equity to private companies. We hope you enjoy the show. So Bill, thank you so much for taking the time. It's a delight to chat with you today. Maybe what we could do to kick off for the benefit of our audience is hear a little bit about your background, and then we'll go into a little bit of your current investing. But we'll start off with some background, if that works.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate you having me here, RJ. It's an honor. I'm an entrepreneur and an investor. Like you, attended the University of Virginia, but got the entrepreneurial bug. So my early days had a strong passion for the stock market. Bought my first stock when I was 10 years old. And, when I was at the University of Virginia in the mid-90s, the internet was just starting to blossom. And so that led to my first company, which was called RagingBull.com, which grew to be a leading online finance site in the late 90s. Really just capitalized on what was going on with the internet and finance, and grew to be one of the leading sites in the late 90s. A little like a financial Twitter today or Reddit or WSB. It was kind of a fun time then, but just gained a tremendous amount of experience, raised my first VC round when I was 19, and we ended up raising over 20 million in total for that business before we sold it in early 2000s. So from there, moved to the Princeton area and launched an independent research business, which grew into two things. One was InsiderScore.com, which was an institutional data analytics business used by hedge funds and mutual funds that had a really nice run with, and we ended up selling that to a private equity firm actually end of last year. And then the other business was Raging Capital, which was a long-short hedge fund that I launched in 2006 and grew to almost $1 billion of assets at its peak. I had a nice 15-year run, compounded north of 15% net of all fees and expenses over that time, and made a decision last year to actually wind that down. So in short, kind of touches on some of the things I like to focus on.
Yeah, no, it's incredible because it's rare that we see someone who's been able to navigate both entrepreneurship and investing successfully and in a major scale. I'd like to go back to kind of the UVA days, because it is, unique that you left the university to start, and it was, the right call because it was the right time. Not many people were kind of really pursuing aggressively their entrepreneurial vision. But yeah, tell us a little bit about that time and how you were able to make the decision to kind of pursue Raging Bull.
Sure. It was an interesting time. I was never a programmer or a coder, but I had a lot of friends who were, and I was online pretty early. And to me, when I was online the first time, the power just hit me. I remember, even though I'm a fairly young guy, I still remember as a teenager driving to the public library to read value lines to research stocks, which that data often was months old, right? And so immediately when I saw the potential of the internet, real-time information, the business idea struck me and was fortunate to have, some friends who were good partners in crime. And we hired a couple of really talented programmers, and the rest was kind of history. But I think, Virginia, there was a really good ecosystem there, got a lot of support for that decision. And to me, one of the things I guess to think about as an entrepreneur is it does pay to be a little young and naive, right? And looking back on it now, the idea that we could build this over summer vacation and accomplish what we did, you would never do that knowing what we know today, right? But it pays to be young and naive.
Well, and raising $20 million during that time, I mean, this is like over 20 years ago. That's a big, sum of money. What do you think was it? Obviously, there was a lot of capital being deployed, but maybe not in that magnitude, for a couple guys out of college or still in college. But, what do you think it was about the idea that really gravitated to investors?
Well, it was the site did a few things. Part of it was data. We were one of the first sites to have free real-time stock quotes, for example, charting, all of that stuff. But the real core of it was a community, and people came to Raging Bull to talk stocks. And so a real network effect there. Again, just like you see with Wall Street Bets or Reddit, late 90s, similar to today, there was a lot of, passion and interest in the market. And, our revenues ramped very quickly because we were kind of ground zero for customer acquisition for a lot of the online brokerages and what have you. And then we were also fortunate to have some really good backers early on. Dave Weatherall, who was CEO of CMGI, which was a high flying incubator back in the day, but he was chairman of our board and took a personal interest and took us under his wing. So just lucky.
Mm-hmm. So I guess we'll head into the investing side, which is a little bit more recent. So how did you kind of make the decision to transition into investing and doing so at a major scale?
Great question. I mean, I think my plan all along was the market. That was my true first love. And I had a few of these entrepreneurial detours with Raging Bull and InsiderScore. And, along the way, was an early investor in Gerson Lehrman Group and Majestic, which turned into M Science. But they were all that common theme of investing and leveraging technology to do it better. And so my destination from an early age was to be an investor. That's what I wanted to do. And, launching the fund was kind of the logical next step for me.
And did you always, given that your beginnings were in tech, did you always kind of like pay more attention to that sector over others, or were you fairly kind of broad based when you were investing with Raging Capital?
Yeah, it's interesting. My early investing mentors were much more value oriented, guys like Michael Price and Seth Klarman and the like. And so that was my kind of initial approach to the market. But, obviously growing up as an entrepreneur around technology, seeing those businesses, I played in a lot of those companies. And so I effectively kind of fused the two. And so overall, we were very eclectic. We looked at a lot of different industries, but obviously we did a lot of investing in tech, but in kind of a value way, often in a hands-on way. We would get involved with companies, going on boards, working as activists to turn them around. So just kind of fusing the two.
And what is it that you typically look for? I mean, there's probably no two situations which are identical, but what are kind of the elements that you look for? And we could do this like based previously and then today, what you're most interested in, what you spend most time in.
Sure. I mean, one thing I like to do is, I kind of collect interesting companies, whether they have a balance sheet attribute or a particular CEO or director I like, or they're playing in a technology space. And, over the years, you build a library of hundreds and hundreds of companies and you keep tabs on them and you kind of pull on threads and you connect the dots, right? And I actually think being an entrepreneur and being an investor is very synergistic in that, one of the things I really like to do is just put myself in the shoes of the CEO or board of a company and really try to think about, if I were running this company, what would I do, right? What are the competitive realities? How do I grow this thing? If I invest more in sales and product, like what are the opportunities? Can I merge with someone? Just what are the realities? And even just running that thought experiment and being a little out of the box and being a little creative, it's amazing kind of that framework you can develop. And I think a lot more is predictive and predictable than you may think initially.
And so I know you're involved in a lot of different industries. I think you know a lot about different industries. What do you think about, maybe I'll just throw one out there. What do you think about blockchain technology? What do you think about crypto?
Well, I think one of the best parts of the investing business is if you're intellectually curious, it does allow you to learn every single day, right? It's the multivariable equation you can never quite solve. And you do just gain knowledge about so many different companies and industries. So that's a hot area. A lot of mind share, like all of us, kind of trying to wrap my head around what's going on there. I struggle with something like Bitcoin being this store of value. I'm kind of old fashioned there. I'd rather have some gold bars, buried in the backyard than be reliant on the internet network or the NSA doing, what have you. But I do think some of the technologies, particularly from a financial technology point of view of, making payments more seamless, emerging markets, some of the opportunities there, I think are really, really interesting. And, I've been fortunate to have invested in some funds that have exposure to companies like NYDIG and a few others where a lot happening there. And when you see guys like, Andreessen, I try to listen to everything, for example, something like Andreessen Horowitz and Dixon, what they're talking about, right? Because they're the thought leaders.
Well, you're at a stage where it's kind of, a lot of people would be envious. You've had kind of your entrepreneurial ventures and, you've had your kind of investing ventures, which are still going on. How do you kind of like balance your time these days? What most interests you?
Sure. Well, it is an interesting time for me. I mean, really, for the first time in my adult life, and even even from a young age, like I kind of own my time, having sold a business and decided to wind the fund down. So I will say, as a strong German tendencies, that's not necessarily the most comfortable place for me, but I'm really trying to just kind of take it one day as it comes. I mean, I'm having a lot of fun. I do spend a lot of time still in the public markets. What's great is I've got 15 years of accumulated knowledge, and now with a smaller base of capital, like the flexibility and nimbleness I have is really refreshing, without that institutional construct. And then I think on the private and the entrepreneurial side, have just a lot more time to build relationships there. There's so much capital chasing entrepreneurial ventures today that, I think the key is, how do you get access? And for me, it's building those one-on-one relationships with fellow entrepreneurs and sharing some of the experience and knowledge that I have with them.
This whole area of private investing has been a really interesting one. We've seen it like balloon over the last couple of decades, and it's still going. The private side is really expanding. And since you're an entrepreneurial thinker, and I know you've kind of dabbled in some of these platforms that are out there that give access into private companies. There's many of them now. There's Our Crowd, there's, Alumni Ventures, which is, I think, run out of New Hampshire. I could name others, but any thoughts? Where do you see it going? You're heavily involved in this private investing in early and growth stage. Do you ever see it being further democratized?
Certainly. It's amazing how the tools have evolved and gotten better and better. I've been, after playing with it years ago, like just recently joined another angel list, syndicate, and just seeing the deal flow and how seamless they make the whole experience. I think very powerful, very compelling, for sure. And really over the last 10 years, it's remarkable how the capital markets on the private side have developed. One of the investments we made at Raging Capital was in Facebook early on. And we were buying that stock when it was still a private company back in 2010. And that was pre-Jobs Act. So we had to, literally navigate cap table issues, and we didn't have all the financial data on the company. And so it's pretty remarkable how that's evolved. At the same time, as someone who's been a short seller for a good chunk of my career as well, I mean, there's a lot of fluff out there. There's a lot of froth, and certainly kind of the doctors and dentists community. Like, there's a lot of money chasing the next deal on these platforms. So I try to be a little more selective and apply my filter, I guess.
Right. Okay. Switching gears a little bit. There's a couple questions I typically like to ask folks on this. I guess this gets into Bill, the person, and your experiences is still veering on the professional side. But could you tell us about a challenging time you faced? It could have been, in those early years at UVA while you were embarking with Raging Bull. It could have been afterwards founding other businesses, or really deliberating about your decision to start investing, more broad scale, or even more recently in a director situation. It could be really anything, but could you tell us a challenging time and when you look back on it, you think, I'm kind of proud of, or maybe it could be a situation which you're not proud of, but typically people like to think of ones that they are proud of and they got through it and learned a lot from it.
Yeah. Well, certainly, the dot-com crash was interesting, but, I had no family. I didn't have a wife. I was a young guy, and so shook that off pretty quickly and just bounced back and went to the next thing. But 2008 was a little different in that, I had two young businesses, InsiderScore and Raging Capital. I had a young marriage, just a few years old also. I had a 1-year-old and another one, on the way. And sitting there in October of 2008 with the fund down 30% plus and the financial world crumbling, hard pressed to really think of a more stressful time. And I do think through that period, there were definitely some deer in the headlight, a few of those weeks, just struggling through it. And I remember coming to the office hoping something would change and hoping the market would go up and what have you, which, I don't know when the moment was, but for me, it clicked that hoping was not what I did, that, I needed to regain the initiative. I needed to go back on the offense. And that was very positive for us. And, kind of that November 2008 timeframe, I think literally like half of our portfolio was trading for below cash. I mean, it was a total wipeout, right? But, we made a bunch of adjustments. We took some losses. We focused on new ideas. And fortunately, my daughter came along in December of 2008, which coincided with a bottom in our portfolio. And in 2009, even during Q1, when the market dropped another 25%, going on the offense, we actually were up every single month in 2009 as a fund, and we're up well over 100% that year. And so a real kind of turning point for our business, but just again, like take initiative, own it.
Yeah, what I always find interesting is, when you're an entrepreneur or investor and if you're the head of your fund, sometimes it could be like a somewhat lonely place in that, all the weight is kind of resting on your shoulders. Was there anything that, going back to that time, where you must have had your thoughts racing about how to kind of come out of this spin, but was there something key that you learned about kind of how to operate in those times?
Yeah, you drink a bottle of red wine on a good day, you drink it on a bad day. I've just been fortunate to have been blessed. Like I'm comfortable making decisions and kind of living with them. And certainly in the investment business, where even on a good day, like there's stuff in the portfolio that isn't going right? You have to be able to compartmentalize and kind of move on and live with those decisions. So I think that's, fortunately, I've just been blessed with that. But I think the other thought is just investing, being an entrepreneur, like those are athletic endeavors in my mind, right? And how do you take care of your body, like get the sleep, get the exercise so you burn the stress? How do you position your personal life so you can manage the ups and downs, right? And so you don't have a big mortgage, you don't have a big cost structure. Some of those other stresses, like how do you manage them so you can really go and play hard on the field?
Mm-hmm. Last question, and I'm particularly interested in your answer to this one because of how you got started fairly young in your career. Is there someone that you think of, that someone you admire, who, when you're making decisions, you think, how would this person frame this problem, frame the situation? Where would they come out in terms of the decision? Is there someone you kind of think of highly in that regard and really kind of channel them as you're making really tough decisions?
Yeah, there is. And, going back to the University of Virginia connection, Michael Bills, who runs a firm called Bluestem, is definitely one of those people for me. I was fortunate to have met him early on. I actually interviewed for a job at Tiger with him when I was still at UVA. He had had a very successful career at Tiger with Julian Robertson, but chose to leave Tiger in the big city and move back to Charlottesville, taught at UVA, ran the endowment for a period of time, got involved with things like the Nature Conservancy, which he had a passion for. So just really respected his work-life balance. Launched Bluestem, which has been an incredibly successful fund of funds. He invests the way I would invest. He's concentrated. He bets on people, and he was a great partner for Raging Capital over the years. But I think the thing that's most impressive about Michael is, and it's also a difficult one, but he's just so intellectually pure and intellectually honest, and very focused on alignment. And I just think about meetings I had with him over the years, where an answer you might give to an ordinary person, maybe slightly political or a half answer or a little bit of spin, like just never would get by Michael. He'd stop you and say, well, what do you really mean? What are you really saying here? What are you trying to do? And just having that alignment is powerful. And he's been a little angel on my shoulder anytime I have a tough decision. Always think of him and how he would ask the question and how would I answer it.
Yeah, it brings me to when I saw you the other day and we were chatting, I'd mentioned how it's really impressive how you've kind of built businesses and had partnerships with close friends of yours, and they've lasted and they've done really well, and people think very highly of you. And that's not an easy thing, and I asked you like, well, have you been able to do that? And you did mention it's just being intellectually honest whenever you encounter, maybe a conflict, different viewpoints. Is that kind of like one of your key tenets of how you operate?
Yeah, I mean, definitely Michael Bills is an influence there. How do you be the honest broker? How do you shoot straight, right? And, I've been fortunate over the years to have, a lot of partnerships and friendships that have had good long durations. And there's ups and downs in those relationships like anything else. But I think when the other person knows that you are being intellectually honest, you are being an honest broker, and you're just trying to call it as you see it, I think counts towards a lot. I think the other thing that really helps is just, and I've really benefited from this, is just investing in relationships over a long period of time. Even when they're not kind of obvious, I've been fortunate. I've kind of collected interesting people and compelling people and have worked hard to stay in touch with them and have worked hard to add value to them in ways where it wasn't necessarily clear how I was getting paid back. It was just, you put it out there and 10, 20, 30 years down the road, something good might happen back to you.
Excellent. Well, I think that's a great note to end on. It's one that I definitely agree with. Bill, thank you so much for spending time with us. I know our audience will find this very insightful.
Thanks, RJ. Good luck with everything.